This is my video on the word paradox, which is one of the most fascinating words that I've done a video on so far. Now, the definition of a paradox is a statement which seems to be impossible or seems to contradict itself, but might actually be true. Now, contradict, just quickly, means opposition between two conflicting ideas, often within the same statement. So that is what a contradiction is, opposition between two ideas usually within the same statement. So a paradox is a statement which seems to be impossible or seems to contradict itself, but might actually be true. Now, there are many famous examples of paradoxes. One of them is when a guy called G.K. Chesterton wrote, "Spies do not look like spies," which is a paradox because, of course, spies look like spies. I mean, what else do they look like? Doctors look like doctors, whatever they dress like, because they are doctors. But then you think a bit more deeply. If spies dressed how everyone thought spies usually dressed, then that would kind of defeat the object, because people would realise they're spies. So spies don't dress as people expect them to dress. So the statement is a paradox. It seems to be impossible, it seems to contradict itself, but it might actually be true. Another famous example would be in Hamlet, where a guy called Polonius says, "Though this be madness, yet there is method in it." So that is another paradox, because madness can't have any method or any planning in it, because that would kind of not be mad. But Shakespeare's maybe saying that Hamlet could be part mad, but still capable of some degree of planning. So though this be madness, yet there is still a degree of cleverness and a degree of planning and method in it. So why might an author use a paradox? Well, if you think about a paradox as a paradox is an answer contained within opposites used to resolve conflicts, or to at least bring attention to conflicts. So when you see it, often when a reader sees a paradox, that makes them really think about what the answer to that paradox is, or at least makes them think, brings attention to the paradox. So what is the etymology of the word paradox, and could that help me understand it? Well, the etymology, which just means where the word came from, of paradox, well, paradox came from Greek and Latin. The para meaning beyond possibility. Beyond possibility. That's kind of where you get paranormal. It means beyond the possibility of normal life. That's what paranormal is. And dox means belief in Greek. So that's where you get orthodox, for example. Orthodox, the orthodox belief. Now, paradox, therefore, means literally beyond belief. Beyond belief. So you can see how knowing the etymology of the word really does give you an insight into what it actually means today. So here's an illustration of a paradox, because you can see that it almost defies belief. It seems impossible. How can that line be ahead in front of this line, yet be joined up to this top bit, which then goes behind the same line. So it seems impossible, but you know your eyes are actually seeing the picture. The picture is there in front of you. So there is a kind of truth within the picture. So that's quite a good illustration of a paradox. Now there are other paradoxes beside paradoxes within poems, and that they can be called logical paradoxes. One example would be the statement, "This statement is false." Now if I asked you, is that statement that I've just written there true or false? Your answer would be pretty hard to get, because if you say the statement is false, then what you're actually saying is the statement is incorrect when it says the statement's false. So the statement is itself saying it's true. Whereas if you say the statement that I've just written is true, what you're actually saying is the statement is correct when it says it's false. So therefore it is false. So when you say true, it's false. When you say false, it's true. So it's a paradox, kind of. Another example would be, say I gave you a time machine, and then you went back and you stopped your parents having children. What would happen? Now you could say, well, obviously I wouldn't exist. But is that true? Because if you stopped your parents having children, you wouldn't exist, you wouldn't be born, but then you wouldn't build a time machine, and you wouldn't go back and stop your parents having children. So your parents would have children. So do you exist or not? It's a paradox. Now, those are two examples of logical paradoxes. Now, literary paradoxes, as in paradoxes in writing, tend to have answers, tend to contain truth, whereby actually in logical paradoxes often there's no answer to whether this statement is true or false, but literary paradoxes tend to actually have answers. Now, how might you use a paradox in an exam? How might you actually bring it up? Well, you might say, here's an example. The paradox in the first stanza of the poem was answered in the last stanza. So that's literally a sentence which you could use if it was relevant and if it was correct in an essay or in an exam, and it'd be quite impressive, I think, because paradox is quite a complex word to get to grips with, so it might quite impress the examiner if you employ it. Now, just quickly, a review. A paradox is a statement which seems to be impossible or seems to contradict itself but might actually be true. It's an answer contained within opposites, is one way of thinking about it, and it's used to resolve conflicts or at least bring attention to conflicts. And where it came from does tell you a lot about what it is. It came from para, meaning beyond possibility, and dox, meaning belief, so literally beyond belief. Now, I hope that helped in you learning what a paradox is.